It's good to be together this morning. Good to gather on the Lord's Day as the church has done for many years. It makes today a special day. There's also another thing happening today called the Super Bowl, which is far less important. Just by show of hands, who is really pulling for Kansas City? Yeah, just three Taylor Swift fans in the room. Okay, good. Who's pulling for Philadelphia? A couple, don't cheer for that. Get out of here. And who doesn't care? Good, yes, let's go. Yeah, let's just go take a nap today, okay? That sounds good. Sounds like a good use of a Sunday, especially today. That's wise, you know? That sounds very wise of you, and it makes sense and is in line with our current teaching series, Get Wisdom. We started last week going through these Proverbs, and here's the cool part. I love the title of this sermon series because it implies that there are certain skills that you and I have to acquire if we want to be successful in this life. Whether we're 7 or whether we're 70, we need to get wisdom. So we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 9 today. So go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 9. Now, Pastor Brent set the foundation last week, beginning in Proverbs chapter 1, going through verses 1 through 7. Now, Proverbs 1 through 9 serves as one giant prologue to the book. So where we were in the beginning of the prologue last week, this week, we're going to see the end of the prologue. And so here's the deal. This morning is going to be all about invitations that you and I are going to receive to be wise or to be foolish. Now, if you're anything like me, I think that many times it's relatively easy to spot the wise person and the foolish person, right? It's relatively easy to spot the wise decision and the foolish decision. Just let me give you a couple of examples, and I'll let you determine whether these individuals were wise or whether they are foolish. So the first individual is a gentleman by the name of Klaus Schmidt, okay? You could probably see by the picture, he's not acting in a very wise manner. He's holding a gun and appears to be masked up. And in 1995, in Berlin, Germany, he plans a bank heist. So he's robbing this bank. The plan is going swimmingly up to a certain point, and the teller is preparing to give Mr. Schmidt the money, and she asked him, "Sir, would you like a bag?" To which he loudly responded, "Yeah, I got a gun." And it was at that point she found out that he was in fact deaf. And so she sounded the alarm, which he could not hear, and the police promptly came and arrested him before he was able to get out of the bank. And in a shocking twist, he ended up suing the bank for taking advantage of his disability. I kid you not. That's a true story. True story. Not very wise. Not very wise. The second gentleman, his name is Maganga is his name, and he was a 17-year-old in Omaha, Nebraska, and on a sunny March day, he holds a gun up to a woman and her child who are in a car on their way to go to school and demands that they leave the car so that he can take it. And so they do. They obey him. He gets in the car. He's prepared to make a speedy getaway. He looks to his right and notices it is a manual transmission, which he does not know how to drive. So he kind of starts and stops for a couple hundred yards down the road before he gives up trying to drive a stick shift and leaves the car on foot, and the police were not far behind and apprehended them. So, not very wise people. We could probably all agree, not the epitome of wisdom, those two men. And we look at things that are wise and things are foolish, and we place them in those categories where it's very, very easy to distinguish who the fools are and who the wise people are. And in our chapter this morning, in Proverbs chapter 9, we are going to see wisdom and folly personified as two female characters. We're going to see Lady Wisdom in verses 1 through 6, and we're going to see Madam Folly in verses 13 through 18. Each is going to invite us to dine with them. And what we're going to see in this chapter is that the invitations to be wise or to be foolish are not always as easy to distinguish at first glance. And in the middle section in verses 7 through 12, holding these two invitations together is a section that's going to assist us in indicating which invitation we have chosen. So let's look at Proverbs chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. This is what it says. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live, and walk in the way of insight. So as we walk through this chapter this morning, we will continually see wisdom contrasted against folly. Now, I want us to quickly take a moment at the outset of our time together to see just how wisdom is described. So we're going to see it in the first 3 verses. Now, I want us to key in on the verbs that are used to describe wisdom. So let's just look at verses 1 through 3 to see what she's all about and what she does. So we're going to see quickly that she has built her house, she's hewn those pillars, she's slaughtered her beast, mixed wine, set the table, and sent out her young women. All of these verbs are action words, right? It's things that she has done. It's ways in which she has prepared. What Solomon wants us to know this morning is that wisdom is firmly established. Lady Wisdom is active. We are going to see that Lady Wisdom is industrious and she invites the simple to life. She's not sitting idly by waiting for something to happen. She is actively building and preparing and inviting, and her call extends to us. And so we see initially that Lady Wisdom has prepared for this banquet that she is throwing. All the verbs used in the initial section here are in the past tense, suggesting to us that wisdom has prepared all of this and she's ready for the feast. There are no last-minute preparations taking place. All has been made ready. It suggests that this house and this feast are complete. When we're told she's hewn her 7 pillars, that number 7, when we see it in the Bible, it indicates wholeness, completeness, or perfection. So we're told that this house has been firmly established. There are no outstanding projects to be finished, no loose ends that we're waiting on. The house is complete and whole. I'm reminded of Proverbs chapter 3, verse 19, where we're told the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding, he established the heavens. These are firmly fixed and in place. What we see is this feast has been prepared. There's no junk food at the feast. There's real sustenance. Solomon is letting us know that wisdom has all sorts of delicacies that have been prepared for us to take part in. The second thing we'll see in this opening section is that Lady Wisdom invites the simple to participate in her banquet. Look at specifically verses 4 and 5. This is her invitation. She calls from the highest places of the town. This location is strategically chosen so that as many people as possible can hear the call and respond accordingly. Wisdom isn't hiding in the nooks and crannies, playing hide and seek with all of those who wish to find her. She's upfront with her appeal, calling to those who are simple and imploring them to redirect their ways. Now, if I were to stand up here this morning and call you simple, you'd probably be a little upset. There might be a thing or two even thrown up at me here on the platform. But this is what the book of Proverbs calls its audience. To be simple is not a derogatory remark. It is not an insult hurled at those who are less than other people. When we see this word simple in the Proverbs, it's someone who is a little bit naive and untaught. The simple person is not stupid, and he isn't a fool who despises wisdom. Instead, he is one whose exposure to life and wisdom has been limited. And because of his inexperience, he is gullible and easily influenced. Now, here's the thing. No matter how old we are, no matter how much experience we have not yet cornered the market on all wisdom. There are areas in our lives where each of us are simple. We don't have all the answers, and we don't have everything figured out. Traditionally and typically the way it goes is the older we get and the more wear and tear we have in this life and the more things we've experienced, the more we acquire wisdom. That is not always the case, but generally true. Those of you who are younger, who don't have quite the amount of experience, who don't have quite the amount of things that have taken place in your life, you are less experienced and are simple in more ways. You have more to learn. But regardless of where you land, a proper perspective of yourself is necessary. Now, I don't know why this is the case, but it feels like ladies are a lot better at this than us guys are. Us men, it doesn't matter who we are. We could be aging, be carrying a couple extra pounds around the midsection. We could be losing our hair. We pass by ourselves in the bathroom mirror and we go, "Look at you, you absolute specimen of a man, you." It doesn't matter what we look like. We look at ourselves the same way. Gals, you're like, "Is this dress? Is it okay? Is my hair? How's this?" Guys are like, "I am an absolute hunk," and everyone should recognize it. And this is, listen, this full disclosure this morning, this has happened to me before. The other day, I was looking at a picture of myself and my son, and we were flexing our muscles, and I was so impressed with myself, I thought, my wife has to see this picture. And so I go to show her the picture, and I don't know what I'm expecting. I think that she's going to swoon and fall in love with me all over again. And I show her the picture, and her reaction, she goes, "Those aren't your arms." So just to establish, my wife thought it was more likely that I had photoshopped somebody else's arms on my body than those were my actual real and true arms. And it was at that point, like so many other times in marriage, I learned a very valuable lesson that maybe the way that I see myself is different than what is actually reality. So many of us need to have a proper perspective on who we are. And the truth is that there are areas of our life where we are simple. We are untaught. There's things that we need to learn. As we march through this series, Get Wisdom, this proper perspective is going to be essential for everything that is to come. It is going to be so beneficial for us if we understand there's areas that I need to improve. There's areas where I desperately need wisdom. I love what Charles Spurgeon says. He says, "The doorstep of the palace of wisdom is a humble sense of ignorance." More often than not, our self-assessment is inaccurate at best. You and I are not entirely full of wisdom all the time. We are simple. And some of us are more simple than others, and that is okay. And here is why. Wisdom doesn't invite those who are wise already. She invites those who need wisdom. I came into this building this morning needing wisdom in many areas of my life, and I know I'm not the only one. Lady Wisdom invites the simple to participate in her banquet. The third thing we see in this opening section in verse 6 is that this banquet leads to life. So important for us. This is openly and readily available to us, this invitation to be wise, but you and I will pay a price to enter into the feasting. The cost is spelled out in verse 6. We are told that we must leave our simple ways. Right now, we have certain ways of doing things and certain ways of going about our business and living our daily lives. And we are told that if we want to be counted among the wise, we must be teachable and willing to forsake what my current ways are to change things up in order to feast with those who are wise. But the rewards far outweigh the things that we'll give up as we are told that we are going to live. We're going to walk in the way of insight. Last week, Pastor Brent mentioned this, that we are going to see many different words used for wisdom. Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, insight, all of these words are used to convey the same idea. It's as if we're staring at a multifaceted diamond, and every time we shift it and turn it, wisdom, insight, understanding, knowledge, we see it from a different angle and a little bit of a different perspective. Despite the cost, the benefits of the way of wisdom seem obvious, and yet many people will heed the call of another invitation. Let's look at the second invitation that is extended to us at the end of the chapter, starting in verse 13. We're told this: the woman folly is loud. She is seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Madam Folly stands in direct contrast to Lady Wisdom. We are told, secondly, that Madam Folly is lazy and lures the simple to their death. So when we went through Lady Wisdom's invitation, first it told us a little bit about her and what she was like, and we saw that she was doing all of these things, that the verbs associated with her were all about the action that she had undertaken to prepare this feast. She had built, she had hewn, she had slaughtered the animals, prepared the meal, mixed the wine, etc., and all of those things determined her character. We are going to see the same thing with this Madam Folly. Let's look at verses 13 and 14 and just see, just like we did with wisdom, let's see the verbs that describe folly. First things first, we see that she is loud, but then she's seductive. She knows nothing. She sits and she takes a seat. Quite a bit different than the character and personification of wisdom. She's lazy, she's loud, she's arrogant, she's seductive, she entices people to herself. All of wisdom's verbs are in the past tense, meaning she is prepared and ready. But Madam Folly, she is consumed with the present. What is happening right now? It's a characteristic shared by foolish people. They will not learn from the past. They certainly won't look toward the future. Everything is about what is happening right now. This is the clarion call of popular music throughout the generations. So many songs talk about living for the night, being in the moment. You're only young. You got to live your life now. Take advantage. Everything exists right here and right now in this very moment. It's because the fool doesn't learn from the past, nor does he look toward the future. He is obsessed with what is right in front of him. And friends, the thing is, as Christians, our perspective is to be uniquely different than that. You and I are to have such a counter-cultural perspective. Think about it. This entire past year, we spent in the Blooming in Babylon series. We went through the book of Daniel, the letters of 1st and 2nd Peter, and Jude. And throughout those letters, we were told that for those of us who have placed our faith in Jesus Christ, we are exiles in this current world. It is not our home. We have this future hope and this future calling to which we are walking toward each and every single day during our lives here on planet Earth. And because of that eternal hope, our perspective is to be one that is drawn toward the future and not consumed by the present. But we have to fight for it, don't we? Far too often we are tempted to make so much out of the current moment and so less out of the future that awaits us. We look at these differences in these invitations. Lady Wisdom has prepared food, slaughtered the animal, prepared and cooked the meat, mixed the wine for the meal. But Folly, on the other hand, tells us that she only provides stolen water and bread. It will provide us initial sustenance, maybe enough of feeling like we're living in the moment, but it's no match for the feast of wisdom. Madam Folly is consumed with the present. Secondly, we see in this passage that she mimics Lady Wisdom. Look at verses 14 through 16. Once again, we're seeing the industry of wisdom standing in direct contrast to the laziness of folly. Wisdom has sent out her messengers, but folly sits idly at the door of her house, calling to those who pass by. And it's not just to those who are passing by. She's calling to those who are going straight on their way. Now, she's calling out to those, maybe those who are going straight on their way, maybe aspiring to accept the invitation of wisdom. Regardless of where they're headed, they are unsuspecting. No one ever sets out to heed the call of folly. No one sets out in this life to become a fool, but yet they end up as fools nonetheless. And part of the reason is, what's so interesting about wisdom and folly is that their calls are issued from the same place. Both are coming from the heights of the city. They are positioning themselves both in the most strategic place to affect the most amount of people that they can. But look at verses 4 and verses 16. Their calls are the exact same. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. Folly will masquerade as wisdom. It will not always be easy to distinguish what is the foolish thing and what is the wise thing. One of the fascinating things about the internet is that it showcases to us so many talented people from all over the world. And there's these artists and bakers that just do these crazy things. They'll try to make things as lifelike as possible. And so you've probably seen these cakes that they make, and they're cake, but they look exactly like real objects. And I thought we could take a second this morning to play a little game together called Is It Real or Is It Cake? Okay, at the very least, you'll end up hungry. So this is a sandwich in a cardboard box with a little plastic screen there. Who thinks that it's real? A couple bold people. Who thinks that it's cake? Most of the rest. Let's see. Is it real? Is it cake? That's cake. That's cake. Okay. What about the next one? That is an Adidas tennis shoe right there. Is it real or is it cake? Who thinks it's real? A couple more people. Okay, let's see. Is it real or is it cake? Show us. That is also cake. I'm getting really hungry. All right, that is a cantaloupe right there. Some of you are like, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. Who thinks that's real? Couple people. Let's see, is it real or is it cake? That is also cake as well. Some of you are like, I wish that I could cut into a cake when I cut into a cantaloupe. That would be a dream come true. So often we are convinced that wisdom and folly are so easily recognizable, that they stand in such stark and contrast opposites, and sometimes that's true. But other times, like these objects that we look at, it's not until you get up close that you can see the difference. Wisdom and folly in Proverbs 9, the call is the same. They're issued from the same exact place, but it's not until you get close up that you can see the difference. Folly paints herself to appear like wisdom. And since she does her best to imitate wisdom, only the cautious and discerning will make the right choice. Friends, not everything that feels right in the moment is eternally satisfying. In fact, many times that's rarely the case. So many times when we indulge in an impulse, in the moment it will feel right, but in the long term it will lead to our ruin. So many times lashing out in anger when someone slights us or wrongs us may feel like the right thing to do in the moment, but it's no match for the wise response. Folly will mimic wisdom. Here's the third thing that we see. Madam Folly has pleasures that are initially satisfying, but eternally destructive. Look at the last couple verses of the chapter, verses 17 and 18. We've already briefly mentioned the wares that folly provides for us at her meal. It's water that's been stolen. It's bread that is to be eaten in secret. Both of these are intended to lead to our ultimate demise. Both carry the idea of forbidden activity. The water that is stolen that's referenced here could be referring to illicit activity, given the fact that to be faithful to one's spouse is likened to drinking water from your own well in Proverbs chapter 5, verse 15. Beyond that, the bread eaten in private is in and of itself a secretive act that is initially pleasing, but ultimately unsatisfying. We get to the chilling verse in verse 18, that the fool who accepts the invitation of folly does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. When we see that word Sheol used in the Old Testament, it is referring to the grave, to the place of the dead. The real danger of accepting the invitation of folly is not that we will attend a bad party with worse food than we could have had across town. The one who accepts the invitation does not have the ability to see behind the veneer and shine of what Madame Folly is offering. And what exists beyond it is an open grave. We're giving a frightening description here that she is hosting the dead. It's in verse 18, we see this literary device called a prolepsis. That's a statement that is being made as if it is already fulfilled. So the description of her guests as corpses in the depths of the grave is a prolepsis. It is similar to the phrase we hear, he's a dead man walking, meaning that because of his past decisions and the current trajectory he's on, it is going to lead to his death. That is a startling reality for those who accept the invitation of folly. And again, it stands in contrast to those who have accepted wisdom's invitation in verse 6. Leave your simple ways and live. But here in verse 18, when we accept folly's invitation, the dead are there. So we've seen wisdom, we've seen folly, and we go to the middle section in verses 7 to 12 to see which one we are choosing. Let's read these verses together this morning. Starting in verse 7. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself. If you scoff, you alone will bear it. It's in this connecting portion of chapter 9 that we see how this plays out in the lives of the foolish and the wicked. We are introduced to two characters and their response to instruction in this section. We'll see the scoffer and we will see the wise. In verse 7, in the first part of verse 8, we'll see that the scoffer's failure to listen will set his course toward destruction. If you remember last week, Pastor Brent told us that listening is love, and whether or not that's creamy, it is absolutely true. Those who have their ears stuffed up and refuse to listen to wise counsel or instruction have set their course and purchased a one-way ticket to death. And it's here where we are introduced to a character who will figure prominently throughout the rest of the Proverbs, and that is the scoffer. When we come across this word scoffer in the Proverbs, it is talking about someone who is unteachable. You cannot teach a scoffer anything. After all, it is impossible to teach someone who knows everything already. The scoffer is today probably more prominent than ever before. In 1999, there was a study done by Justin Kruger and David Dunning, and they coined what is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So what they did was they hosted a test by examining a number of undergraduate students in several categories. So the competency of writing grammatically, the ability to reason logically, and a personal sense of humor. Now, here is what they found as a result of that test. They found the students who were less competent had the tendency to overestimate their results, whereas those who performed better had a tendency to underestimate their results. So in other words, the less people know, the smarter they think they are. How many times do we see this played out in a social media forum? There are people who always have all the answers, and it is absolutely phenomenal how they're not heads of state already. We have an exorbitant amount of scoffers among us today, those who claim to know all the answers. Individuals who have never met a problem they couldn't Google their way out of. And they've yet to change their mind on any significant issue. These individuals are absolutely convinced that everyone needs to hear their opinion on most things. That if the world is not hearing from them, it's somehow incomplete. Scoffers do not necessarily lack intelligence, but they do harbor a strong dislike for any form of correction and thus render themselves unable to be course corrected. This person will feature prominently throughout the rest of the Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 1. It says, "A wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke." Proverbs 15:12 tells us, "A scoffer does not like to be reproved. He will not go to the wise." It is clear that the scoffer cannot abide by any wisdom. Therefore, he is not content to let anyone around him practice it either. Whenever he hears it, his response is to sneer and to ridicule. The scoffer will verbally abuse and assault the wise teacher. But we see that the wise stand in direct contrast to the scoffer. The wise will gladly receive instruction. Let's take a look at the wise in the second part of verse 8 and verse 9. The ability of the wise to listen will lead to life. And as I went through this portion of the text this week, I was so encouraged, and you should be as well. What characterizes wise people does not lie in their ability to live in some sort of sinless, meditative perfection. So many times when you and I think wisdom, we think this Greco-Roman way that involves a lot of philosophy and our ability to say wise things and have sage-like advice for people. But when we look at wisdom through the Hebrew lens, it's all about skill for living. Being wise has less to do with the things I say and more to do with the things that I do. And so one of the characteristics of wise people is their ability to receive correction and be course corrected. That stands to reason that wise people aren't mistake-free. They're just people who have the ability to learn from their mistakes. And so many times, for those of us who have children, we desperately desire our children to be wise. And so we will tell them to avoid certain things, don't do certain things, and what do? They go right ahead and do those things. And it's everything within us not to come around and say, "I told you so." We want them to avoid those mistakes, but what we do on the back end of those mistakes that they make is come alongside of them, gently correct and reprove them and set them back on the path of the wise. Young people, if you're listening this morning, be wise and listen to people who possess wisdom. If you're here this morning and you are younger, I love you to death, but there are people in this room who know more than you do. I know it's a shock. I'll give you a second to process that. There are people here who have been following Jesus for a very, very long time. And sometimes those are your parents, sometimes those are brothers and sisters in Christ. They love Jesus. They've made their fair share of mistakes. They love you. Allow them to speak into your life. What will characterize the trajectory of your life is whether or not you can be teachable. That's what sets wise people apart from foolish people. There's a character that we meet in the book of Acts, and his name is Apollos. In Acts chapter 18, we're introduced to him. We're told that he's an incredible Bible teacher. He was eloquent. He was well learned. But when Paul heard him teach, he noticed he was missing some key components about the gospel. So he instructs some ministry partners of his, Aquila and Priscilla, to take him aside and explain to him the way of faith more accurately. We see that in Acts chapter 18, verse 26. Apollos could have bristled at their correction. He could have said, "Look at my pedigree. I'm a wise teacher. I'm eloquent. I'm well learned. I don't need to listen to you people, you tent makers." But thanks be to God, he listened to wise counsel. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 31 tells us, the ear that listens to life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. We're going to see in this verse and a half a quick 3-step progression practiced by wise people. Here's what we see. A wise man will respond and learn from rebuke. Do you want to be wise? Hopefully the answer is yes. Then let me ask you this question. When was the last time you received correction? Remember what we said. All of us here this morning have areas of our life where we are simple, where we are untaught, where we need wisdom. So when was the last time someone spoke into your life and you recognized, I need to course correct? When was the last time you opened your Bible and read the Word of God and realized, I haven't got this entirely right, I need to course correct? When was the last time you changed your mind on a significant issue? Hearing wisdom and counsel from someone in your life whom you would consider wiser than you. Wise people respond and learn from rebuke. Secondly, a wise man will add to his knowledge. There is always more wisdom to be acquired. Some of you are older saints here, and you're an absolute treasure to the church. If you've been a part of a church for 70 years, you've most likely heard around 3,500 sermons. Not to mention being a part of countless Bible studies, classes, prayer meetings. Your knowledge and experience, again, make you a treasure trove of wisdom. But don't forget, you do not have the market cornered yet. You have not been perfected yet. There are still parts of your life where you are simple. Add to your knowledge and continue to grow wiser. It's when we stop seeking out wisdom that we stop being wise. Moving on from there, we listen and learn from rebuke. We add to our knowledge. And as we do those things, a wise man will be able to enjoy his life. The Proverbs tells us here point blank, if you are teachable, you will have a good life. I think the tragedy of the 21st century is that so many have lost the ability to be teachable. It is rarely an attribute that is listed on resumes or in job descriptions. Maybe we need to start a new campaign called Make America Teachable Again. The third thing we see in this middle section is that the theme of Proverbs underscores our motivation toward wisdom. So if the stakes are so high, how do we tell the difference between wisdom and folly? For those of us who are more experienced and have some miles on the tread, how do we teach the next generation to go to the house that is full of life and feasting and not the one that leads to death? And we'll see the key right here at the center of chapter 9. Solomon brings us back to the theme of the book in verse 10. Remember, Proverbs chapter 1 through chapter 9 functions as one big prologue. And Proverbs 1 through 7 and Proverbs 9 and 10 serve as a bracket for the prologue when we're told the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. It is only by way of right relationship with God that anyone can recognize the right house and accept the right invitation. Once again, we see the prosperous effects of wisdom at work here in verse 11. Just as it was in verse 6, it promises life to those who will practice it. And this wisdom cannot be borrowed from somebody else and returned. It must be possessed. Verse 12 makes that abundantly clear this morning. So we see two different invitations from Lady Wisdom and from Madam Folly, and both issue the same call, broadcasting from the heights of the city, whoever is simple, let him turn in here. But as you begin to get closer and as you begin to approach the heights, you begin to see that one call is vastly different from the other. Wisdom is fixed and prepared, while folly is lazy and indolent. The table that wisdom has set is laden with meat and wine, while folly only offers bread and water. Wisdom's invitation will lead to life, while while initially enticing, will lead only to the grave. Here's our big idea this morning. Wisdom openly invites you to feast, while folly deceptively plots your funeral. One of the things that we have to remember as we go through the Proverbs together is that Proverbs is a gospel book. So if we leave every morning with a sense of moralism, with a sense of here's the things that I have to do, we are going through this series in the wrong way. And what I love about Proverbs chapter 9 and the call of wisdom is the emphasis on the feast. And churches have been getting together and eating food not just because potlucks are what we do, but because feasting is a prominent theme within the pages of our Bibles. The nation of Israel, in its history, is commanded to keep certain feasts in order for them to remember God and the things that He had done on their behalf. And then as we get into the new covenant in the New Testament, Jesus Christ institutes this new covenant by taking the bread, taking the cup, and instructing the church, do these things in remembrance of me. That remembering is based around a meal, around a shared union with Christ and fellowship with Him. And we will see at the consummation of all things in Revelation chapter 19, we read of the marriage supper of the Lamb. Feasting with wisdom is more than just making right choices and avoiding doing bad things. Feasting with wisdom is more about being with a person. And that person is Jesus Christ. He is calling you to Himself today. Those of us who are simple and untaught, He is saying, learn from me. Those of us who desperately need instruction, we desperately need to be reproved, we desperately need to be rebuked. We've been wandering, we've been wavering. Jesus says, come to me. Allow me to correct you and bring you back into alignment. Jesus Christ is wisdom personified. And for those of us who follow Him, rejoice this morning that we have union with Him. We are able to be wise not because we have the gumption, not because we have the strength or the fortitude. We're able to be wise because we follow the one who is. That's good news this morning. That's not us to be left with some sense of these are the things that I've got to do and the things that I've got to figure out and the things that I've got to stop doing. Look to Jesus this morning. Look to Christ and be like Him. Choose His invitation today. As we end our time together, I want to ask you 3 questions. If you are simple, the book of Proverbs was written for you. Are you here